Greetings, everyone. Hope all of you are having an absolutely fantastic day. Lex Imperialis is out, and that means we can review the mechanics for the Overseer archetype. Earlier today, I provided a review for the Lex Imperialis DLC and a breakdown of the Arbitrator origin mechanics, so be sure to check out those links in the description below. If you haven't purchased Rogue Trader yet and are looking to do so, there's a GOG link down below that you can use. I get a small percentage from that purchase and would definitely appreciate the support. Alright, let's get into the new Overseer archetype. This playstyle focuses on utilizing familiars to debuff enemies, buff your allies, and deal devastating damage on the battlefield. There's a lot of variety and complexity to this playstyle, so you'll want to watch this video all the way through because I will bounce around in different sections to help everything make sense. So let's first talk about how you unlock this secondary archetype. The first choice you make when becoming an Overseer is which familiar do you want to take, and each of them is unlocked in different ways. The Cyber-Mastiff, which is the dog, is available to everyone who has the Arbitrator origin, regardless of which initial archetype you selected. The Cyber-Raven is available to all Psychers, regardless of which initial archetype you selected. The Servo-Skull Swarm and Cyber-Eagle are available to officers and operatives. This means it's very possible that when you select Overseer, there will be more than one familiar available to you, but you will only be able to pick one. Unlike other archetypes, the list of abilities and talents available to you changes based on which familiar you choose. First, I will review the talents and abilities available to all Overseers, and then we will review the ones that are specific to each option. You will automatically get the Reactivate ability, which allows you to select an unconscious familiar in your line of sight within a 5-cell radius. The familiar regains 40% of its maximum wounds and returns to combat. You can also use this on other unconscious familiars as long as their Overseer is still in combat. This is part of the reason that having multiple Overseers on the same team can be very advantageous. There are two abilities that all Overseers can choose from during level ups. Consolidation lets you dash towards your familiar for an amount of cells that scales with your fellowship bonus. This movement doesn't trigger attacks of opportunity, and you can move through allies and enemies, but not obstacles. If you are using an eagle, which can soar and therefore cannot be reached, you'll gain that amount in movement points instead. This can be nice for characters who remain in the backfield and need more movement to get closer to the action, especially if you have a high fellowship score. Strategic Adaptation provides a bonus for one round depending on how many wounds your familiar has. If they have less than 50% wounds, the next 3 hits against them have their damage reduced by an amount equal to your fellowship, intelligence, and perception bonus combined. This is great if you have a playstyle that relies on comboing with your familiar and really need it to stay up. That being said, I found keeping familiars alive difficult to some degree and would recommend expecting them to go down often. If your pet has more than 50% wounds, you will deal additional damage with your next attack that scales with your perception bonus. Perfect for soldiers and operatives. If the attack kills the target, then it doesn't count towards the attack limit per turn, and you regain any action points spent on it. This is just beautiful when you are attacking an enemy you know you are about to kill. Alright, next let's get into the talents that all Overseers can choose from. Armored Hide applies a 50% damage reduction to attacks of opportunity against your familiar. Dogs are already immune to AOOs, and I didn't find avoiding attacks of opportunity to be particularly difficult with the other familiars, so I would skip this. Autonomous Medkit increases your familiar's wounds by twice your toughness bonus. If you happen to have high toughness, this could be a good way to make your familiar more tanky, but I think your points are better spent elsewhere, and I would skip this. Brothers in Arms causes all allies within a 3-cell radius to have their resolve increased by 2. More resolve is great, but you will probably come up with better ways to stack it high, and consequently I would skip this. Cohesion grants your familiar a 50% dodge bonus against your attacks, which could be very advantageous if your familiar is always in the middle of the action. A great example is your dog constantly standing in the way of your shotgun attacks. Dependable Ally is triggered when a familiar uses this ability on an ally and provides a +5 bonus to the characteristics that are considered key to the familiar. Whether or not this is useful depends on how often you use familiar abilities on your allies. For me, it's worth it with the dog and the eagle, but not so much when it comes to the cyber raven and the swarm. Master's Patronage triggers at the start of every turn and gives your familiar an amount of temporary wounds equal to your resolve. Again, for the most part, I'm not into taking talents to protect your familiar, so I skip this. Resistance is futile, causes all enemies in a 3-cell radius around the familiar to take a penalty of 5 to the familiar's key characteristics. 5 isn't enough to automatically reduce an enemy's bonus from these characteristics, which means oftentimes the passive will do nothing, and consequently I skip this. Rite of Calibrations causes your first use of Overseer abilities to cost 1 action point less. In Rogue Trader, the first round often decides how the rest of the fight will proceed, so the better your action economy, the better time you will have. I think this is worth picking up. Rite of Solar Nourishment increases your familiar's key characteristic by 5. Whether or not this is worth taking depends on how you use your familiar. If it's mostly just an object to trigger extra damage or redirect your other archetype abilities, then this probably isn't worth it. If you actually use familiar abilities, then this is worth considering. I would definitely take it for the eagle and the dog. Finally, Side by Side is triggered when you are adjacent with your familiar and causes both of you to reroll failed dodge attempts once per attack. Without question, this is amazing if you are using the dog. All right, now let's get into the abilities and talents that are specific to each familiar, but first let's talk about what all of them get. All familiars have 2 key characteristics which are used for their abilities. Consequently, it doesn't really matter what characteristics your Overseer prefers to use, because that's completely independent from what your familiar prefers. All of these key characteristics scale with the Overseer's character level. All familiars also get advanced sensors, which provides a bonus to armor and deflection that scales with their key characteristics. In addition, dogs and ravens get a 20% bonus to dodge, while eagles and skulls get a 40% bonus. Familiars cannot get extra turns, nor do they suffer injuries or trauma, although you do receive momentum penalties when they are damaged or go down. All familiars have an equipment slot where 1 item can be placed. When you reach your palace in Dargonis, there's a vendor standing in front of where you can board your ship who will sell items that can be placed here. These items not only increase the familiar stats, but oftentimes they add functionality to their abilities that make them even more useful, and the effects get more powerful as your profit factor increases. Getting into what's unique for each familiar, let's start with the Cyber-Mastiff. The dog is all about damage and benefits the most from being aligned with frontline characters who will run with it. It will automatically get bestial reflexes, which ensures its movement never triggers an attack of opportunity. Therefore, you are free to send the dog hunting after an enemy. It also gets flanking maneuver, which allows its attacks to ignore the target's block. Those attacks can still be parried or dodged. Finally, the dog automatically gets the jaws that bite. If its target has more than 50% of its maximum wounds, the dog gets a damage bonus equal to its weapon skill bonus. If the target has less than 50% of its maximum wounds, that bonus is doubled. So once again, if it hasn't already been hammered home, the dog is all about laying down the pain. You automatically get 3 abilities after selecting the Cyber-Mastiff. Apprehend lets you select an enemy that is in your line of sight. The dog will use all of its movement points to reach that enemy or get as close as possible. If it reaches the target, the Cyber-Mastiff attacks, dealing 50% more damage and inflicting the apprehended effect, which lasts as long as the 2 characters are adjacent to each other or until another order is given. If you attack an enemy that is apprehended, the dog will make a free melee attack against it, dealing 50% less damage. You can stack up major punishment against the foe when using a character who can attack more than once during a turn. If an apprehended creature attempts to move away from the dog has a percentage chance to stop that movement. This amount scales with its key characteristics, weapon skill, and strength. If that chance fails, the dog will follow that enemy using no movement points and attack it. So not only is apprehended a great way to stack up damage, it can also help to lock down shifty foes. Apprehend can be used multiple times each turn, but each use within a round increases the cost by 1 action point. Another Another ability you automatically get is Battle Mode Standby, which makes the Cyber-Mastiff fight autonomously. On the left, you will see it has a separate turn in the turn order, just like your party members, and then the dog will move and attack completely on its own. This is great to use when you don't really care who the dog attacks and just want it to hit someone, or if you don't have the action points or patience to manage it properly. Next, we have Protect, which allows you to select yourself or one ally in your line of sight, and the dog will immediately run to that ally or get as close as possible. Upon reaching the target, the dog will apply Protected to it and make a melee attack against one adjacent enemy. If an enemy hits that character, the dog will automatically make a free melee attack that deals 50% less damage. To make this attack, the dog can move to any cell that's adjacent to the protected character for 0 movement points. Also, if the protected character moves, the dog will move with them for 0 movement points. The disadvantage to all of this is that the dog will always be passive, waiting for an enemy to hit you before it strikes, as opposed to Apprehend, which allows it to be aggressive right along with you. The last dog-specific ability you'll automatically get is the Heroic Act. All of the Overseer heroic acts are called Overcharge, and each one has a part that is the same, and then each one has a part that is different based on which familiar you have chosen. The section that all of the heroic acts share is that it will heal the familiar to full wounds, and your next 3 Overseer abilities cost 1 action point less, which oftentimes makes them free. The part that's unique to the Cyber-Mastiff is that until the end of combat, the dog deals additional damage equal to a percentage of the target's maximum wounds that scales with the dog's weapon skill bonus. Against boss enemies, that can be a massive number, so this is definitely worth considering. Alright, now let's look at the Cyber-Mastiff abilities you can select during level up. Advanced Tracking gives the Cyber-Mastiff an increase to damage equal to half its weapon skill bonus for each cell it traverses into your next turn. This is actually a monster skill that can cause the dog's damage to skyrocket, but we'll talk about that more in the talent section. Bite lets you select one enemy in your line of sight that is within half of the dog's movement points, which halfway through the game was around 5. That enemy suffers double damage and must pass a toughness test or they will fall prone for 1 round. Bite is an order that clears Apprehend and Protect, but it gives you another way to manually have the dog attack, which makes it a great option. Growl hits all enemies in a 2-cell radius and applies a 1-round percentage penalty to how much damage they can deal. The number scales with your dog's strength bonus and will always be at least 10%. I focus on killing enemies instead of debuffing them, so this doesn't appeal to me, but it definitely has merit. Finally, Run lasts for 1 round and causes the dog to inflict levels of bleed equal to its weapon skill bonus on all adjacent enemies it passes. Each affected enemy increases the dog's critical hit chance on the next attack by a percentage amount equal to its strength bonus. This ability also removes Immobilized, Prone, and Stunned from the Cyber-Mastiff. I like the last part because there were definitely some fights where the dog was stunned or knocked prone, and I really would have liked to fix that. The other effects are unimpressive because it's difficult to purposefully create situations where the dog can run through a lot of enemies, and these effects aren't worth the trouble. Alright, now let's get into the Cyber-Mastiff specific talents, and there are 2 that specifically apply to the Protect ability. Automatic Protect allows protected allies to ignore attacks of opportunity. This is fantastic if you want to use your dog to bail out squishy backline characters from tight situations, or if you want your main character to make a beeline towards particularly annoying foes. Perimeter Defense doubles the amount of movement points a dog can use to reach a protected ally. This is a monster talent when combined with Advanced Tracking to give the Cyber-Mastiff massive bonuses to its damage. Travel to a far out of the way enemy, use Protect to have the dog run to you, and then use Apprehend or Bite to have the dog attack for a massive increase that will last into your next turn. Bonus points if you can trigger multiple attacks with the dog while it has this boost. Without question, if you use the dog, you'll want to pick this up. There are also two talents that specifically focus on the Apprehend ability. Chain Maul causes each hit scored by the dog against an apprehended foe to deal additional damage equal to its strength bonus, which by mid-game was around 6, and this ability stacks. It resets once you use Apprehend again, and no question, if you use the ability often, which I certainly do, then you'll want to get this. Victimize increases the damage an apprehended enemy takes from you by a percentage amount equal to twice your fellowship bonus. You will probably have a decent rating in fellowship to pump up your coercion bonus, so this is definitely worth picking up. One talent focuses on both the Apprehend and Protect abilities, and that is the Battle Mode Terror, which triggers every time a Cyber-Mastiff hits an enemy due to one of those abilities and provides it with a +1 bonus to its key characteristics. This bonus lasts until the end of combat and it stacks. If you use these abilities a lot in ways that cause a dog to attack enemies, then this is a no-brainer. Personally, I do not, and consequently, I skip this option. There is one talent related to the Battle Mode Standby ability, and it is Weakest Link, which causes you to always critically hit when attacking an enemy that the dog has hit while in standby mode. That sounds great, but again, when the dog is in standby, you have no control over what it does. And in this game, you want to be very strategic about who you attack, so personally, I skip this. The last unique talent is Auto Regeneration, which is triggered when the dog is suffering from bleeding, burning, or poison at the start of your turn, and reduces the level of that effect by its toughness bonus. Again, personally, I don't focus on how tanky the familiars are, so I skip this. That's it for the Cyber-Mastiff, so now let's take a look at the Cyber-Eagle. This is also a damage-focused familiar with a little bit of debuffing, but it's meant for scouting ahead, so you don't need to be a frontline character to get the most out of it. Speaking of which, both the Eagle and the dog will oftentimes go ahead of the group, and they can spot traps or other hidden items in the environment, so it can be very useful to have them around. While the Eagle can be used by both officers and operatives, I think it's pretty clearly meant for operatives, and officers are better off going with the Skulls, which we will review later. Eagles have agility and perception as their key characteristics and automatically get the Winged Aegis passive. At the start of combat, or whenever you end your turn, the Eagle will start soaring, which makes it immune to targeting or damage, and it will regain 10% of its maximum wounds every round. That makes it sound quite tanky, but on the contrary, Eagles love being annoying, and consequently, they get rocked all the time. Similar to the dog, Eagles get Flanking Maneuver, which allows its attacks to ignore the target's block, but those attacks can still be parried or dodged. You automatically get the Obstruct Vision ability, which lets you select one enemy within a 12-cell radius that is in your line of sight, along with one cell adjacent to that enemy. The Cyber Eagle will move to an unoccupied cell, and if the enemy has a melee weapon, it will automatically attack using its lowest AP cost option. If the enemy has a ranged weapon, then it shoots at the Eagle with a 50% chance that it hits an ally instead, if there are any within range at that angle. Once this attack is complete, the Eagle uses a counterattack that has a percentage increase to damage equal to twice its agility bonus, and the target is obstructed for as long as the Eagle remains in that cell. Obstructed creatures cannot leave their cell through regular means and can only attack the Eagle. Each subsequent attack will have the same effect, a chance to hit their ally along with a counterattack from the Eagle. This is a monster ability against boss or elite level foes who focus on melee damage if, and this is a big if the Eagle can actually dodge or withstand their attacks. It's also magnificent against annoying snipers who can be forced to pick apart their own allies. This ability can be used multiple times per turn, but each subsequent attempt increases the cost by 1 action point. There are 4 abilities you can choose from during level ups. Advanced Tracking lasts for 1 round and causes all obstructed enemy attacks against the Cyber Eagle to always hit their allies. Again, this is great to use against a sniper who has plenty of low-level allies to pick off. Blinding Strike lets you select an unoccupied cell in your line of sight, and then the eagle will move to that cell, dealing its weapon damage to all adjacent enemies along with blinding them for 1 round if they fail an agility test. That test has a penalty that is 5 times the eagle's agility bonus, and once this move is completed, it goes back to soaring. Blinded enemies have a -30 penalty to weapon and ballistic skill, along with a 30% penalty to dodge and parry. All the way around, it's a very powerful debuff, and this is great to use against clusters of enemies. Live Bait lets you choose 1 ally and grant them an amount of bait stacks equal to twice the eagle's perception bonus. As long as the eagle is soaring, when an enemy attacks the bait, the eagle will deal its weapon damage to that attacker, and 1 stack of this effect will be removed from the ally. This sounds great, but it's very difficult to predict which ally an enemy is going to target. Oftentimes I use this ability and it ended up being wasted because my team never has a dedicated tank. If you are using a character who forces enemies to treat them as a priority target, this could be really nice. Strafe lets you select a cell within a 12-cell radius around the eagle, and then another unoccupied cell within whatever your eagle's current movement speed is. By mid-game for my eagle, that number was 12. The familiar moves to the first cell and then dashes to the second one, dealing its weapon damage to all enemies in its path. Once this is finished, it begins soaring. This is a monster ability. This game loves setting up squishy snipers way out in the distance, and it can be very difficult to take them out quickly. By mid-game, my eagle could deal anywhere from 40 to 60 damage to a target, and that can annihilate many low-level enemies. There were multiple fights where this ability alone took down half a dozen foes. The best part is that this does not count towards your attack limit per round. You can strafe a few enemies and then use your regular abilities to take out even more. Great stuff. Your Heroic Act is overcharged, and just like the Cyber-Mastiff, using this will completely heal your familiar, and your next 3 Overseer abilities will cost 1 action point less. What's unique to the Eagle is that until the end of combat, attacks from obstructed enemies in the direction of the Eagle that hit their allies automatically critically hit. Very nice. Alright, now let's move to the unique eagle talents. Bloody Mark is triggered when the eagle successfully attacks an obstructed enemy and causes the foe to suffer levels of bleeding equal to both the familiar's agility and perception bonus. Bleeding is a fantastic effect to place on pesky bosses who are difficult to take down, and oftentimes that's exactly who you will want to obstruct, so this is worth considering. Eagle's Vigilance causes your abilities to deal 65% less damage to the Cyber Eagle. This is also worth considering because the Eagle is oftentimes in the thick of the action. That's not a concern when it's soaring, but if it's obstructing an enemy while you are trying to use area of effect abilities, this could be a problem. Emergency Protocol triggers when the Eagle suffers lethal damage for the first time in combat and causes it to regain 33% of its maximum wounds and start soaring. I like this because sometimes those bosses will knock the Eagle out, and this saves you from having to manually revive it. Sharpened Talons increases the Eagle's damage by an amount equal to its agility bonus. The more damage, the better when it comes to the Eagle, so yep, you'll definitely want this. Swift Shadow is triggered when the Eagle stops soaring and gives it an amount of deflection equal to its agility bonus for 1 round. I don't like this because the Eagle doesn't have a ton of wounds, and this small amount of deflection isn't really going to help matters. If the Eagle doesn't dodge the attack, it's just going to get hit hard. Tenacious Talons is triggered right before an Eagle starts soaring and forces all adjacent enemies to pass an agility test or they become staggered for 1 round. Staggered enemies experience a -20 penalty to weapon skill, ballistic skill, strength, toughness, and agility. The test will have a penalty equal to 5 times the Eagle's agility bonus. It's pretty easy to ensure the Eagle starts soaring while it's adjacent to the exact enemies you want to debuff, so this is a great pickup. Finally, Wind Currents provides a +3 bonus to the Eagle's key characteristics whenever it is soaring. This is a small bonus that could easily be meaningless, so personally, I would skip it. All right, now let's take a look at the Cyber Raven. With the addition of this familiar into the game, Adira has skyrocketed over Cassia into the role of your most powerful party member. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. The Cyber Raven has a warp relay ability that takes single target non-damage psycho abilities and relays it to multiple people. That means powers like Iron Arm, Prescience, and Forewarning that would only apply to one person can now be applied to the entire team at the click of a button. On that same token, abilities like Sensory Deprivation, which would only blind one creature, can now blind an entire group of foes at one time. This is absolute madness, and having access to these capabilities impacts your entire team. The Cyber Raven's key characteristics are agility and willpower. It also automatically has the Warp Relay passive, which again allows it to relay psychic powers. But in addition to this, all enemies in a 4-cell radius around the Raven are under surveillance. This means you ignore their cover and they cannot block your attacks using a shield. Obviously, this is very useful. Moving to abilities, you automatically get Relocate, which lets you move the Cyber Raven by an amount equal to its movement points. Since it flies, it can move through occupied cells. You also automatically get Purification Discharge, which deals shock damage to the 3 closest enemies in a 4-cell radius around it. The amount of shock damage is equal to your psi rating times the familiar's willpower bonus. The advantage of this is that it does not count towards your attack limit per round, so you can still use a devastating psycho ability after deploying it. Not a bad option. Of course, you'll have access to the Overcharge Heroic Act, and just like the first 2 versions we covered, this will heal the Raven to full wounds while also causing your next 3 Overseer abilities to cost 1 action point less. The difference here is that until the end of combat, you can relay attacking psychic powers through your Raven. Again, prior to using this, you could only relay powers that didn't deal damage. Needless to say, this is a monster ability that can let you do crazy things like using Psychic Shriek on an entire group of foes at one time. Bananas. All right, now let's get into the unique Raven abilities you can select during level up. I'm going to tell you up front, the major problem in this list is that in order to select one of them, you have to forego getting an additional psycho ability. Consequently, most of what's here isn't worth it, but there are a couple of nice options. Advanced Tracking triggers when you relay a psychic power and causes a random enemy in a 4-cell radius around the Raven to become immobilized for 1 round. If the enemy is already immobilized, it gains 1 stack of Perplex instead. Each stack of Perplex inflicts a -10 penalty to ballistic skill, weapon skill, intelligence, and perception. This isn't worth it because it's random, so the enemy you really want to be immobilized might be completely untouched. Complete the Cycle causes the psychic power that has been relayed through the Raven in the current round to be relayed again. This is a monster ability that lets you easily apply buffs to party members you may have missed or reapply debuffs and damage on new groups of enemies. I would definitely recommend picking this up. Evil Eye targets all enemies in a 4-cell radius around the Raven and causes them to suffer warp damage along with a stack of Perplex until the end of combat. The damage ranges from 1/5 to half of the Raven's willpower bonus, and this does not count towards your attack limit per round. Still, it's hard to justify taking this when you could take an amazing psycho ability instead, so I would skip it. Stabilize causes all allies in a 4-cell radius around the Raven to gain temporary wounds in an amount that's 3 times the Raven's willpower bonus, along with armor in the amount of its willpower and ability bonus combined for 1 round. Sure, you could do this, or you could just kill all of the enemies or debuff them to the point they cannot do anything. I would skip this. Now let's move into the talents, where there are some really strong options you'll want to pick up, starting with Bound by Warp. This causes all enemies in a 4-cell radius around the Raven to have their willpower reduced by an amount equal to twice the Raven's willpower bonus. By mid-game, that number is 14, which helps Cassia, Adira, and others land devastating debuffs on large groups of enemies. pick this up. Castigating Echoes causes the effect of psychic powers relayed through the Raven to be calculated as if the psi rating was increased by 1. Without question, this is a must-have pickup that will make it even more essential to use the Raven's warp relay at all times. Impure Force causes the Raven to deal warp damage equal to twice its willpower bonus. Nah, you have much better ways to deal damage, skip this. Psi Resonator triggers when you relay a psychic power through the Raven for the first time in a round and gives you back 1 action point. Again, no question, this is a talent you'll want to pick up. The more action points, the better. Ruinous Flows triggers at the start of a round if Veil Degradation is 15 or more and causes all creatures in a 4-cell radius around the Raven to suffer warp damage equal to 9 plus 3% of the target's maximum wounds. Again, you have better ways to damage enemies, plus you are probably trying to keep Veil Degradation down as low as possible. Skip this. Sacrificial Penance is triggered when you relay a psychic power through the Raven and provides it with a +3 bonus to willpower along with dealing 3 direct damage. This is very powerful if you are using the Raven to deal damage, but I think it's vastly more effective to stick with using it as a relay, so I would skip this. Finally, Warp Buffer triggers when you are within 4 cells of the Raven and trigger a Peril of the Warp. The peril will affect a random enemy inside the area instead of you, but if there are no available foes, then it will still affect you as usual. If you are playing as a frontline psyker, then it's more likely this will happen around enemies and the talent is worth considering. Personally, I just deal with perils when they occur, and I would skip this. Alright, and finally we have reached the final familiar, the Servo-Skull Swarm. The way Ravens can take non-attacking psychic powers and relay them to the entire team, the Skulls can extrapolate non-psyker single target support abilities, allowing you to buff and heal the entire team at one time or debuff large groups of enemies. The effects of those abilities are calculated using the Skull's characteristics. Unlike the Raven, the Swarm can extrapolate extra turns as well, although not to the entire group. Instead, when you use an ability that provides an additional turn within the Swarm's area of effect, such as Bring It Down or Move, the Skulls will select another random ally and it will receive the extra turn as well. Remember, this does not work on other familiars, and when a character has taken an extra turn, they cannot give another character an extra turn. The Swarm is considered an enemy's lowest priority target and has immunity to all types of force movement. The Skull's key characteristics are intelligence and fellowship. Currently, the character sheet says different, but that should be fixed by the time the game comes out. Similar to the Raven, all enemies in a 4-cell radius around the Skulls are considered under surveillance. This means you ignore their cover and they cannot block your attacks using a shield. Useful when you run out of support options. You automatically get relocation, allowing you to move the Swarm for an amount of cells up to its movement points, which at mid-game was 7. You also get the heroic ability Overcharge, and like all the other ones, it will heal the Swarm to 4 wounds, and your next 3 Overseer abilities will cost 1 action point less. What's unique to the Swarm is that until the end of combat, your allies will gain the same benefits from under surveillance that you do, ignoring the cover and block of impacted enemies. In addition, allies within a 4-cell radius around the Swarm are immune to critical hits. Very nice all the way around. There are 4 abilities you can select from during level up, and they all revolve around different signals you can send to the Swarm. So keep in mind you have your own abilities from your first archetype that you can send to the Swarm, and it will extrapolate it to the rest of the team. And then there are direct signals you can send for the Swarm to perform specific tasks. All signal abilities last until the Swarm is destroyed or you use another signal. The first ability is Destruction Signal. At the start of their turn, each enemy in a 4-cell radius around the Swarm must make a willpower test, or it will make a free attack against the closest creature, whether they be an ally or enemy if possible. This test has a penalty that is 5 times the Swarm's fellowship bonus. This is great to use against siloed groups of enemies who are certain to attack each other. other. Priority signal triggers at the start of an enemy's turn when they are within a 4-cell radius of the swarm and forces them to pass a willpower test that has a penalty equal to 5 times the swarm's intelligence bonus. If they fail, they consider the swarm to be their priority target. As long as this signal lasts, the skulls receive an armor and dodge increase equivalent to 2 plus the familiar's intelligence bonus. This can be a great way to relieve pressure from your team, especially when getting pelted by snipers you are not positioned to deal with yet. Regeneration signal is triggered at the start of an ally's turn when they are within a 4-cell radius of the swarm and provides them with additional wounds equal to twice the swarm's fellowship bonus, and there's a percentage chance to remove 1 injury equal to half your Medikai skill ranking. This doesn't affect unconscious allies. I prefer to eliminate enemies before they attack or divert their attack in another direction instead of focusing on healing, so I skip this, but it might fit your playstyle. Finally, advanced tracking provides the swarm with a +10 bonus to its key characteristics, and its signal abilities affect targets for 1 additional round if the signal is replaced, the swarm is destroyed, or if the affected target moves further than 4 cells away. This is fantastic if the signal abilities are important to you and you want to keep them going. Now let's move over to the unique swarm talents. Emergency stimulation triggers once per combat when an ally suffers lethal damage in a 4-cell radius around the skull and causes them to regain a percentage of their maximum wounds equal to 1/3 of the swarm's fellowship bonus. The swarm then suffers an amount of shock damage equal to 100 minus 1/5 of the overseer's Medikai rank. In my opinion, similar to Wrath of the Righteous, you will always rather have a party member than the swarm. So this is a great talent to have, even if the shock damage destroys your familiar. Remember, you can easily raise it back up with no injuries. Energy mobilization triggers when you use Bring It Down on an ally and it extrapolates through the swarm. The familiar will receive a +5 bonus to all characteristics, and this stacks. If you use the signal abilities quite a bit, then this is great because it will make them more powerful. If you don't, then this is irrelevant and I would skip it. Personally, I believe it's worth picking up. Impure Force causes your swarm to deal shock damage equal to twice its intelligence bonus when passing by adjacent enemies. You most likely have much better ways to deal damage, so I would skip this. Safe Shelter causes all enemies in a 4-cell radius around the swarm who are in partial cover to be considered protected by full cover. If your party is heavily made up of backline characters who can use the protection, then this is great. Otherwise, I would skip it. Self-learning algorithms is triggered when an ability is extrapolated through the swarm. If the ability affects allies, the swarm gets a +1 bonus to fellowship, and if it affects enemies, the bonus goes to intelligence. The bonuses stack, and this is great if you heavily use extrapolation and you care about the swarm signal abilities. I use extrapolation all the time, so I definitely think this is worth considering. Symbiosis is triggered when you extrapolate an ability through the swarm for the first time in a round and gives you back 1 action point. This is fantastic and absolutely a talent you'll want to pick up. Finally, Unseen Support is triggered when you are 5 or more cells away from the swarm and increases its fellowship by an amount equal to twice its intelligence bonus. If you care about the signal abilities, then you are likely sending out the swarm long distances away from your character, and this is absolutely worth considering. And with that, finally, we have finished reviewing all of the Overseer mechanics. Now, hopefully you see why I felt like this video needed to be done separately from our coverage of Arbitrator mechanics. As always, if you have any questions, leave them down below and I'll be happy to assist. One more time, if you're going to purchase Rogue Trader, there's a link down below you can use to do that. Big thank you to all of my supporters and the people who have been rocking with the channel. Hope all of you enjoyed this video. Take care.